the very day that you wreck it. Though it may take some time, oh, to get to know this old shipwright, then I will bid thee good fortune, and I will bid thee farewell. I'll leave a ghost at the helm to guide you through the realm. For here there'll be monsters. I don't deny that I'm worth. All I ask is that you name it for its birth before you make it. I did build it not just to watch you go, Name it Arthur, name it for the sea. Name it Arthur, name it after me. Name her Arthur, name her for the sea. Name it Arthur, name her after me. Name it after me, name her after me.
Well, hello everyone. What a pleasure to have you all checking in from all over the country. Super fun. So I am Jason Haas, second generation proprietor here at Tablas Creek. I am joined by senior assistant winemaker Chelsea Franchi. Looks like joining from home.
Yes.
So just want to give you a quick overview of how this is going to work. We're going to be interspersing information about the wines, about the vintages that created them, about what we're seeing out here at the winery, with the 6 wines that are in the wine club shipment. Normally, there might be 3 of us on screen, me and Chelsea and Neil. Neil, our director of winemaking, who is currently in the UK, where it's like 1 a.m. And he is, I think, probably finishing his last pint of beer, and then we'll be heading. In fact, that's a picture of him in Dublin, I believe, from part of the tour that he's been on with Paso Robles Wineries over the last week or 10 days, taking him through Europe. So you get me and Chelsea tonight, which that's going to have to be good enough. But Chelsea, would you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. My name is Chelsea Franchi, and I have been in the cellar at Tablas Creek for the last 18 years working with Neil. Before that, I worked in the tasting room. So I do have an extended history with this family and this winery and this brand. And I couldn't be happier to have that as my reality.
Yeah. Super cool. So in addition to the 2 of us, we will be joined by Chef Jeff Scott, who has again made 2 pairings, one for the white and one for the reds. Unfortunately, Chelsea, I think I'm just going to be the one who gets to taste them.
I hope you're not going to pick up Neil's flag that he always runs with and shoves it in my face to let me know what I'm missing.
I make no promises.
Maybe you should, because then everybody else can see it too.
But Jeff will also hop on camera and talk about how he developed the dishes that he made, but also give his thoughts about kind of pairing with these kinds of wines more generally. And I know I always very much enjoy that.
Well, and speaking of, long and rich history, I mean, Jeff has been working events with Tablas Creek for how many decades now? So if there's any chef in the Paso Robles area that knows how to work with our wines, you've got the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to ask him when he's actually on camera, but I think he did his first event here at Tablas Creek in either 2003 or 2004. Like, talk about history.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect.
So we really hope that this will be interactive. I mean, we have things to share with you. We have Ian Consoli, our director of marketing. He's at the switchboard, so he's going to be plugging in photos, information about the wines, all of that. So when you see a picture pop up, that's going to be Ian. But also, if you have comments, he can pull those onto the screen so that we can see them and we can answer questions. So we hope that you will. There we go. We hope that you will contribute to this, because really, I always find that the most interesting places that we get to in these sorts of events are places that are directed by the audience. So please do toss in questions and comments as we go along. Don't feel like you need to wait. We will, I'm sure, here and there ask if people have questions, but don't wait. Ian will pull them onto the screen for us to address when there's the appropriate moment in the discussion. So so one of the mistakes that we made at the early versions of these events is that we talked way too much at the beginning and did not encourage you to try the first wine. There's really no wrong way to do this. We know that some of you got the tasting kits, and I'm going to have Chelsea demonstrate how those work in a moment. There are others who are just planning to open a bottle from the shipment. That's great too. Or just open some Tablas that you've been wanting to open from your cellar. We're happy to weigh in on our thoughts on anything. So there's no wrong way to do this. But Chelsea, do you want to talk about the Master of the World tasting kits?
I do. So this is a really cool company that we've been working with for the last few pickup parties. And essentially, we send them the wines that are going to go out into the club shipment. And then they put it in this beautiful package. So this is the box that gets delivered. And you open it up, and I've taken the bottles out now, but it essentially looks like kind of a little wine library inside of there. And the picture on the screen, you can see how the bottles all nestle in there. So we'll be working from left to right in our tasting tonight. And these bottles are they're so cool. So you have the great label that looks just like the actual wine bottle that has all the information that you might want to look into. So if it's a blend, it has the blend information right there. And it is 187 mils for each of these tastes. So it's plenty to share with, a couple or maybe even three if you're light drinkers. And Jason, how many bottles of wine are you drinking if you drink all of these on your own?
If you finish all of these on your own, you're having a bottle and a half of wine. So just be conscious of this. This is really meant to share. And even if you're sharing it with one other person, that's still 3/4 of a bottle of wine per person. So just be aware, sip responsibly. And these will keep for another few days at least in your fridge. So if you open them tonight and you don't finish them, don't feel bad about sticking them in your fridge and enjoying them over the next few days.
Absolutely.
I do not have one of those cool little tasting kits. So instead, I got a flight of each of these wines from our tasting room. So one of the fun things that we have been doing over the last week or so since the shipments were released, and that we'll continue to do for about another 3 weeks, is anyone who comes and would like, a wine club member who comes and would like to have their tasting flight be the flight of the wines in this shipment can choose that. So we have all of these wines that are being poured out of keg in our tasting room right now. I did get full bottles also so that I can do a little like show and tell, but I'm not actually opening any of the bottles for this. And that's one of the things that we're excited about with the tasting flights, is that these are all coming out of kegs. So there are no waste, no wasted bottles, no wasted wine. And you can come and taste these on your own schedule.
And you don't typically open Panoplie anyway. I mean, when we had Panoplie in bottle, that wasn't necessarily an option that was available. But now the fact that you are planning to do them in keg, and we are putting these wines all in keg, you do have the opportunity to go in and kind of wrap your head around, well, what kind of event do I want to save this for? How long should we lay this down? Just to, yeah, get an idea of what it really is.
Just how special does my dinner have to be before?
Just with the right
cool.
person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's anything that we learned during COVID, it is do not wait to open that special bottle. Find the excuse.
Wines are meant to be enjoyed.
Taking my advice, even though again that I sort of didn't, saying that we often made people wait too long to taste the first wine. If you are going in order, this is the moment to pour yourself some of the 2023 Tablas Blanc and give it a taste. So this is a wine which is always based on Viognier. It's our showcase for Viognier, but we've learned that you can put a lot of other things into a Viognier-based wine and still get that lovely, luscious, kind of peachy stone fruit Viognier character. This vintage is particularly special because we didn't make it in 2022. It was a year that we had to sacrifice the Tablas Blanc because of the impacts of a third year of drought and a frost that hit very late for us. It hit on May 11th, which is the latest spring frost that we've ever gotten here. And that devastated about a 10-acre section of vineyard that is unfortunately all planted to whites. So in order to make enough things to send out to wine club members, the only way that the puzzle fit together was to sacrifice the Tablas Blanc and use the Viognier and the Marsanne and the Grenache Blanc and the Roussanne that would otherwise go into it in varietal bottlings. So that means that we haven't gotten to talk about Tablas Blanc in a couple of years. And I was wondering, Chelsea, do you want to talk about like your conception of the wine? You're the one who's usually in charge of making sure that the blending makes sense around the blending table and that all of the pieces add up and that we don't overcommit and make the same wine out of two different lots. Like, so when you think about Cote, what do you think about?
Cote de Tablas to me. So essentially, I'm just going to give a brief rundown of our blending session and generally what it looks like. So we go through and during harvest, everything's hand harvested, it's fermented separately, and then it's aged separately. So sometimes for blending, we have, depending on the vintage, anywhere from 28 to 40 different lots of white wines. And we're able to really fine tune where they go in each of the wines. So when we start the blending process, we'll go through and we'll taste all the individual varieties without having any kind of preconceived notion of what they are. So we know that we're tasting Grenache Blanc, for instance, but we don't know which block it comes from because so often we have these personal relationships with these different fermentations. And you're like really, really rooting for some of them to just like be the shining star. And some of them were maybe a little bit more challenging during harvest. So you kind of have this bad taste, not a bad taste in your mouth. That's probably the wrong turn of phrase to use. Just kind of a mental frustration with certain fermentations. So you want to make sure that you're not holding on to any of that. So we go through and we taste everything blind and we give a score from 1 to a 3. So a 1 is going to be something that is elegant and it has depth and it has complexity. It has, that gravity to it. It's got it all. A score of 2 is going to be something that is vibrant and it has a beautiful energy to it, this nice lift, but it maybe just doesn't have, a 1. It's just a little bit more flamboyant, perhaps. And then a 3 is usually something that we kind of earmark that might need a little bit more work in the cellar. So 3 is typically something that might be oxidized and needs a little SO2. It might still be fermenting, so it's got some sugar, so we can't really wrap our head around exactly where it's going to be going. But essentially, the Cote de Tablas, when we build this, we're really looking for something that is exceedingly affable. Like we want to make Cote de Tablas something that is really incredibly friendly and that fits with just a broad array of foods and experiences. So the Tablas being a little bit more of that Côte de Rhône style, in contrast to the Esprit, which is going to be more of your Chateauneuf de Pop style. And it's based on Viognier, so already it's got that friendliness going for it. But in the last few years, adding in all these fun other varieties, like Claret Blanche, for instance, this has been a really, really fun project. So I do think, with our Viognier too, especially in hotter climates, Viognier can have a tendency to get maybe a little bit overbearing. It can be, like I always talk about, that feeling of when you bite into like a yellow peach in the peak of summer and you just have like the juice dripping off of your elbow. Viognier can really easily lend into that realm. Our Viognier, I think we pick quite early, especially for our region. And so you do get a little bit more of that, like that minty greenness. So especially paired with all these other varieties that lend richness and depth, this is a really, if we're just trying to make a friendly wine, I think we might have overshot, but.
Yeah, I think anything from 2023 has a certain level of seriousness just because it was such a great vintage. And we'll talk more about the 2023 vintage when we have some of the reds that are coming up. But I did want to bring Chef Jeff in to talk about the pairing with this Cotes Tablas Blanc. And it was a diver scallop, which I love scallops anyway. So I was excited when he suggested this. And then there's a bunch of other cool things that go along with it. So I see Jeff walking out to me, which is always the most exciting moment in any of these tastings. And I feel like I might have to do what Neil always does, show you the plate.
That was a little bit of a Jaws entry here.
The downside risk is that if I tilt it a little too much, it ends up on my keyboard instead of on the plate and in my mouth. So that would be very sad.
It just felt very dramatic. I enjoyed it.
Slowly rising. So this will also give Jeff time to get in front of his monitor and tell us what it is that we're tasting and how he chose it.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you again. Happy spring to everybody. And this was an exciting menu to write for sure. It's a dish that is just inspired by the season. And first of all, I love to do a chilled scallop dish, which you don't see as much. And so we're searing off the scallops, letting them rest at room temperature, and then chilling them in the refrigerator for about 15 minutes. And it's giving it this ripe, beautiful impression of scallop that's super, super juicy. Asparagus, cipollini onion, and kumquat all coming into season right now. And so the dish kind of makes itself. It's all about the different flavors that are coming right off the farm today. And so to start with the asparagus, which I'm really proud of, there is an organic asparagus farm in Gonzales, which is in the Central Valley here. And a lot of asparagus coming from south of the border isn't going to exhibit that sweetness and that great flavor and the true asparagus flavor. This does. Jason, do you feel that little bit of sweetness in it? In the asparagus? And that kind of comes through. We sear off the scallop, serve it on top, and then decorate it with a little bit of cipollini petals. So that's a sweet cipollini onion that we lightly roast. That echoes the sweetness of the scallop. We top it with a little bit of soft herbs. And then something I've made a couple of years in a row, I would say, just as a reflection of spring, is a kumquat emulsion. And if you look at the plate that Jason had showed you, the emulsion that's on it almost looks like a hollandaise sauce. Of course, hollandaise and asparagus being a classic pairing, but it is in no way a hollandaise sauce at all. A kumquat emulsion is whole kumquats that are blended with a little bit of sugar, rice vinegar, and ginger, and then emulsify with oil. And it gives it that really cool look. It almost looks like it's a butter sauce, but it's not. It's super bright, really, really fun to eat. And Kumquat Emulsion is actually the name of my new band that I'll be featuring in the next couple of months as well.
I love it.
Joke. How do you guys feel about how the emulsion and the scallop and the asparagus play together?
So good. The scallop is delicious. Everything tastes kind of like itself, but more intensely. I feel like that's one of the things that like great preparations of great raw materials do is they don't. It's not like you're muddying the flavors at all. Everything is like itself, but more so.
Absolutely. And yeah, all the techniques on this are very, very simple. And again, just kind of try a 3-ingredient kind of play. And we're topping it with a little bit of soft herbs. I have a little fennel frond in there. My favorite herb, chervil, is on top of it. Has a light anise flavor to it and a little bit of chive. Really a great dish to prepare as a first course for people coming over because you've blanched the asparagus, that's ready to go. The scallops ready to go, and just finishing it off with the kumquat. So yeah, I'm super proud of the dish. It's something I haven't seen a whole lot of people do. And I just love it when people say, hey, no, that's hollandaise sauce. And I'm like, no, there's absolutely no butter in this sauce at all. I think asparagus is a little bit of a subject as well. Many people feel that asparagus doesn't go well with wine. It's kind of the lore that goes on and on. And interestingly enough, when you're in France, there's asparagus on everything. I mean, I ate so much asparagus when I was there. And of course, pairing with some of the great wines there. But I also feel like with this Cote Blanc, with the Tablas Creek wine, the asparagus has that earthy sweetness to it, and it almost brings out the floral character in the wine, in my opinion. Did you feel the same way?
It does, yeah.
Jeff, I feel like you greeted us by saying happy spring, and you truly delivered. That dish absolutely completely encompasses what spring feels like to me.
It does. And, as a chef, as soon as the seasons change, that's the most exciting time to cook. So, last month we've been cooking a lot of winter flavors for so long. We're really looking forward to it. And now getting into the beginning of April, everything is coming out. And so we're all just so excited about all the flavors that are coming at us and showing it, just like Jason said, really, really great ingredients, doing the best you can with it, using good technique, and then just letting those flavors shine. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. We will see you in, according to my calendar, about 40 minutes for the red pairing.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. So I'm curious, anybody out there, if you made this dish, these recipes are downloadable from our website. We did include them in the promotion. If you made this, I'm super curious to know how it went. If you made something else that you're pairing with the white, I'd love to hear that too. So toss that into the chat if you are.
We're always looking for ideas for our own dinners, so please do.
Cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 2024-2025 winter. So it feels like we have been alternating between days that we're already done with winter and it's summer, and days where we're still right in the middle of it. And I felt like I got a little bit of that today just in my drive back. I was hosting a wine dinner up in Monterey last night, and as I was driving back, there was sun, there were dark clouds, there was rain, there was sun and rain at the same time. And the temperature would go from the mid 50s to the upper 60s, depending on where I was on this trip. So, so funny comment from Sarah on what she would pair with this wine with. Yeah, make your pick. But the year, a lot of people think of the year as being kind of where are you in rainfall compared to normal, because we've got to get our rain between November and April. If it's gonna rain, that's when it's gonna rain here, and we're at about 80% of normal rainfall. But in a lot of ways, the way that it has come has made it feel like we've gotten more rain than we actually have. We got good rain early, and that got the cover crop sprouted and everything going. And then we had this sunny interlude where it was sunny and cold in January and sunny and warmer in the first half of February, to the point that we were worried about bud break happening early. And then it cooled off and started raining again. And we've had a lot of rain over the last month. So we have our cover crop. It's incredibly green. I think Ian has a picture. Yeah, I mean, we're at the point now where, if you don't look carefully, you can't even see the vines because the cover crop is as high as the cordons are. And our sheep really have not been able to keep up. I mean, I was taking my mom and a friend out around the vineyard today, and there were places where like we had the sheep in the vineyard and you could not see the sheep until you got close to them because the grass was taller than they were. So like, other than shouting out like, get to work, come on, like there's not a whole lot that we can do about that. It's just a sign of the vintage. We did get the people sometimes wonder about frosts, because we do worry about frosts once we have bud break. But in the winter, frosts are actually really good. So December, January, February, this is a picture of where it was cold enough to actually have still frost on some of the dried leaves from last year's vintage, even after the sun came up and hit them. So there were a bunch of nights that was down in the mid-20s this winter. It's really good for dormancy. And just in the last couple of days, we have seen bud break. So it is now the point at which like life is bursting from those vines again. So I feel like this has sort of been the ideal winter here in a lot of ways. I mean, sure, we would have loved another 5 inches of rain. Who knows? We might get another 5 inches of rain next week. There's a storm that they're predicting. But if we're going to get rain and cold and warm and sun, the sequence in which it's come this year has been terrific. I don't know. What are your thoughts as you've been sort of experiencing this winter, Chelsea? What's your thoughts as a human experiencing the winter of 2024-25?
Well, as a human, I'm also a skier, so I feel like the winter started off a little frightening. Not a lot of snow, and we've really been able to extend the season quite well. Gotten a lot of turns in this year, which it's not just a recreational hobby. The Sierra Snowpack is really the way that you're going to tell whether California is in a drought or out of the drought, or where we are as far as our water stores go. So right now it's looking really good. And then as a human living in Paso Robles right now, I gotta say, now is the time to come visit. I mean, you're showing the pictures of bud break, and I feel like every single time you walk outside of the winery, it is just the most magnificent sense. I mean, there's wildflowers blooming everywhere, all the grasses. Everything is just so fresh and just delightful. Make sure to bring your Claritin for sure. But everything else, it couldn't be better.
Lovely. Okay, let's dive into the second wine. So the wine number 2 is our Dianthus from 2024. And this is our estate rosé that is made from Mourvèdre with the lead grape. So in this vintage, we used almost as much Grenache as Mourvèdre, and then little bits of Counoise and Senso. So probably, I'm guessing that most of the people out there are more familiar with our Pétillant Rosé than with our Dianthus. So Chelsea, do you want to talk a little bit about how the two differ and how you go about making each of them?
I'd love to. So the Dianthus Rosé has a much longer history at Tablas Creek. The Pétillant Rosé didn't start being made until about 2012. But Dianthus is essentially made from some of our top lots of red that we have that are in our vineyard and then come into the cellar. Where essentially it's made 100% using the Saunier method, and Saunier in French means to bleed. So depending on the vintage, depending on the grape variety, depending on what we're looking for, we'll leave, we'll process these red grapes, so the Mourvèdre, Grenache, Counoise, and Senso. We'll process them the same way we are going to if we're making a red wine. They'll go onto the sorting table, through the destemmer, into a tank. And 24 to 48, maybe 72 hours later, we're checking frequently to see what the color looks like, how things are smelling, how things are feeling. And depending on once we hit that marker that we're looking for, we'll bleed juice off of the tank. And then that'll get sent into another tank for fermentation. So with this process, it's a much richer, much more bodied rosé. It is quite serious. And this is definitely something that I would recommend pairing with food, where I would say the Pétillant, which is nearly 100% direct press. It only sees about 2.5 hours on the skins, because that's the amount of time that our press cycle runs. That is much lighter, much more delicate. And that one, that one can be a great picnic wine. You don't necessarily have to pair that one with food. It's enjoyable just as a glass on its own.
I think there's a picture that we have queued up that shows the two rosés side by side. Ian, um, can you find that one in the deck? Yeah, perfect. So that one on the right is the Dianthus, the pinker, darker peach color. The one on the left is the Panoplie Rosé, and you can see the difference between direct pressed, where it is removed from the skins, and you're basically just working with the juice for the vast majority of the wine, versus the Dianthus that gets that time, a day or two, or sometimes even 3 with the skins to pick up color and flavor. And I think most rosés around the world can kind of fall into one of those two camps. They're either made more like white wines, which means you're basically focusing on the juice. That's what the Panoplie Rosé is like. Or they're made a little more like red wines. They're like lighter bodied red wines where you have a significant amount of character from the skins. And the Dianthus is that model.
Yeah, but I would like to say too, though, both of these are made throughout harvest. So for both of these wines, the juice isn't going to go anywhere else. The Panoplie is direct pressed and sent into tank as Panoplie Rosé. The Dianthus is pulled out of all of its individual component lots and put into a tank and fermented as Dianthus. And these are what we call rolling fermentation. So we're building these wines basically from the start of harvest to the very end. So you have fermentation that lasts. It's a 2-month arc essentially, which I do think adds a lot of complexity and a lot of depth for a wine that people just want to pop and pour and enjoy in the sunshine.
Yeah, I think there's this idea that rosés can't be serious wines. And there are certainly some rosés made around the world in both saignée and direct press style that are essentially these simple wines to enjoy in the first few months, and that's kind of it. But one of the really great things I think about the American wine market over the last 10-15 years is that like rosé has boomed enough that there is room for rosés of varying levels of seriousness, and it's a great food pairing wine. I know those of you who've attended these in the past know that my kind of hack food pairing for dry rosé is fried chicken. Like it doesn't even need to be fancy, just like salty and fatty and rich. You pair that with dry rosé like the Dianthus, and it is magical. So Chelsea, we're not doing a specific rosé pairing with Jeff. We're doing a white and a red. What do you like to pair this Dianthus with?
Honestly, I would say the Dianthus is one of our more versatile wines that we make. I think more than any other wine, the Dianthus straddles that line between a white and a red. It has the acidity, that bracing structure of a white, but it does have the richness and the depth that you associate with a red wine. So I definitely lean more towards like a lot of barbecue and, things with like really strong, powerful flavors, because this wine can stand up to them. And also too, like the time of year, typically that you're pulling out rosés, you want to be cooking outside and you want to be enjoying something that you made outdoors.
Yeah. I remember I did a wine dinner. This was years ago. This was at Thomas Hill Organics when Julie Simon was still the chef there. Which was still one of the most memorable wine dinner pairings I've ever done. It was with the Dianthus, and it was a Cajun spice rubbed quail with a salted watermelon feta salad that with this wine, with the Dianthus, was just this like mind-blowing experience.
Amazing. That's not typically the barbecue that I'm doing with it, but yes.
Okay, Richard had a question on rolling fermentations. And I'd love Ian to pull that up on the screen, but also like, can you talk about the importance of fermentation temperature with rosés? Because I know that's something that the people might have heard at least a little bit about.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our rosé temperatures, we do keep significantly lower. So we're typically fermenting anywhere from 57 to 62 degrees. And we want to make sure to keep those temps lower because they are going to yield much more vibrant flavors and aromas. We really want to preserve that energy. So the warmer the temperature gets, you are going to get, and I'm not saying it's bad, it's just not the style that we're looking for. And this is not just rosé, but through a lot of our wines as well. you are going to get like a lot more extraction, a lot more, rich characteristics that we're not really looking for with these wines. And with the rolling fermentation, essentially what I mean by that is, we'll add, for instance, that first pick of Grenache. So we pull the Saunier juice from that first pick of Grenache. It starts to ferment. So you have this kind of sugar spike, and then it starts to drop down as the fermentation completes. And then all of a sudden we add that next pick of Grenache. And so you essentially have this like really cool kind of roller coaster sugar graph. And that's what we mean by rolling ferment. But essentially, we're just like slowly building those layers throughout the entirety of harvest, which makes a really, really cool wine in the end.
And one question that I get sometimes that I would love you to weigh in on. Most people think of rosés as being something to drink like that first summer that they're released, so the summer after they're made. And I feel like that's probably right with our Patelin Rosé, the direct press rosés. I think drinking in the first year is usually good, though they certainly have the substance to hang more than that. Do you feel the same way about the Dianthus, or do you treat that differently?
Dianthus is a pretty serious wine. Dianthus, we definitely can have people hold on to for a little bit longer. And this is interesting because we've been doing these, the 10-year retrospective tastings, and both of these rosés have always been shockers. I mean, the last few years, we've really been petitioning to include the Dianthus in the horizontal tasting. Because 10 years later,
in the 2024 retrospective tasting of the 2014s, we actually included the Dianthus in the 10-year retrospective.
Yeah, the Dianthus with some age really shows beautifully, I think. It's a very surprising wine, but it holds on.
I had a writer in town recently, and this was his first visit to Tablas Creek, and he wanted to do a comprehensive tasting across all the things that we did, and we tasted the 2024 Dianthus. He was like, "This is not ready to drink yet. Like this is not like." For me, this isn't. I was like, well, do you want to taste the 2023? And we tasted the 2023. He's like, oh, this is perfect. I was like, great. Like, so, and that's sort of in keeping with the way that like old school Bandol, like Bandol is the Mourvèdre based rosé from the Mediterranean coast of France that we get a lot of the inspiration for Dianthus from. They didn't even used to release their wines until the fall. So the rosés were released in the fall, and it was only because they got so much pushback from the American market that said, like, we want our rosés young, they have to be young, that they kind of acquiesced grudgingly and released them in the spring. But if you talk to Bandol producers, they still mostly say that they like their wines best like the winter and spring after, not the one where they're first made, but the next one.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, we do have both vintages, I think. So
we always try to hold back a little bit of the previous finish of Dianthus so that the next one is ready. Till the next one is ready. Cool. Okay. I think there's one more picture maybe that Ian might have, because there's one further distinction between the Patelin Rosé and the Dianthus. The Patelin Rosé is purchased from other neighboring vineyards. Patelin is French slang for neighborhood. So those are vineyards and passerobles, most of whom have our cuttings in the ground. The Dianthus is 100% off of our estate. So you get the regenerative organic certified, CCOF organic seals on the back of the label. So I wanted to highlight that.
So cool.
So the Dianthus is the only wine in this shipment that is from 2024, though members who get the white wine selection did get the 2024 Vermentino as well. But while we're talking about 2024, we just spent a week around the blending table turning. It was a chilly week, so we lit the Yule log setting on our TV monitor to keep us warm. But we spent a week around the blending table turning 39 lots of white wines into 4 blends and 4 varietal whites that we'll be releasing this year. Chelsea, do you want to talk a little bit about what you are excited about with what we learned in that process, or what we're going to be making from 24 on the white side?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we all walked out of that tasting session, when we were just doing the original blind tasting and scoring process. I feel like all of us just floated out of that room with smiles on our faces, which is such a wonderful feeling. There was so many strong lots that just really sang. And it's just so great to have an experience like that, because it is a little bit anxiety inducing to basically just present the entire year's worth of work in front of everybody and have them like actually score it. That's scary. It's very stressful.
Like your final exam.
Yeah. Yeah, we've prepared as much as we possibly can, but this is it. Yeah, so to walk out of that and everybody is essentially just like so delighted after tasting through all these beautiful wines. I did think it was really exciting that the blend for Côte de Tablas that we chose has both Picardon and Claret. That seems like a big, I don't know, I think that's just really, really cool. Just, that much more interesting and fascinating. I think one of the most exciting things, are we talking about it? We're talking about it. I saw
We're talking about it. We still need a name, so
yeah. So I know we're not calling it Panoplie Blanc, but we're all calling it Panoplie Blanc. But essentially we are doing a wine club member only white wine. So much in the same way that Panoplie is just, kind of like our barrel select most exceptional wines from the vintage into one special bottling that's just for wine club members. We're going to be doing the same idea with white wines now. So, I mean, all of us, the reason I started working at Tablas Creek was because of the Esprit Blanc. So now to have the Panoplie Blanc is just like, I lay awake at night and I'm just so excited.
Brian's comment's pretty funny. But yeah, I have been dreaming of doing a kind of a white wine that we could just be as selective as we wanted to make something in small amounts, but truly extraordinary. And this felt like the year to do it. What we got, the quality of the lots that we got were incredibly high. The quantity was not incredibly high. I know Richard asked about white volumes being up or down from 23. 23 wasn't like it was plentiful, but it was about average in terms of our long-term yields, which is the only time we've been even at average since 2020. 2024 was off by about 15% in terms of the tonnage that we got in. And then we realized when we got around the blending table that it was also off about another 10% because we got fewer gallons of juice from every ton of grapes. And that we think was just because of the stress of the heat of the year, maybe the cool flowering period. So we got smaller berries with more of the weight being in skins and seeds. So anyways,
vintage.
Yeah, it's very concentrated, very intense, and it is a little bit scarce. Not like 2022 levels of scarce, but pretty scarce. So Sarah asked what varietal wines we will be releasing. So do you remember that off the top of your head, Chelsea, or do you need me to figure it out?
So we're doing Grenache Blanc and Marsanne, Roussanne, and Viognier.
Right. And then we used all of the Claret, the Bourboulon, and the Picardin was selected either for the Esprit Blanc or for the Côte de Tablas Blanc.
Correct.
And then the Panoplie Blanc, whatever, working title here. The Panoplie Blanc is just, it's kind of like the old model that we used to use for the Esprit Blanc with just Roussanne, Grenache Blanc, and Picpoul, right? Am I remembering that right?
Yes. Yes, I don't have the exact percentages in front of me, and I don't have them stored in my brain. But essentially, it's like taking it back to old school, but making sure, like I said, that these lots are chosen specifically for their intensity and their power and their elegance. Yeah, it's phenomenal. I'm really looking forward to a bottle of that in my house.
Yeah, no, we're super excited. We were thrilled with the way that it came out. Okay. So let's leap to the first of the reds. And I am super excited that we actually had enough of this to make as a wine club wine. We've been doing varietal bottlings of Counoise since 2003, I think, was the first varietal Counoise that we did. again, don't at me if I'm wrong on that. But we've been doing it not every year, but when we can, for more than 2 decades. And I think we've only had enough to actually send out to the whole wine club maybe 2 or 3 times in those 2 decades. And if there's going to be a year where we are going to do it, 2023, which had that long, slow ripening cycle from the relatively cool year and beautiful weather at the end of the harvest season, it's a great year to do it. So I think, do we have a graph or two of that 2023 growing season that shows? Okay, so this is sort of a hard one to read maybe, but that cluster, each of those lines, this is heat accumulation. So this is growing degree days, which is a measurement of heat. And you can see all that cluster of lines up at the top, including the dotted blue line at the very top of the graph, which was 2022. And then 2023 is that dashed red line that's kind of like alone in the middle, like the bottom middle of that graph. So you can see it was almost 20% lower in terms of heat accumulation than the year before. And that meant that the ripening was very gradual. We didn't start picking until the middle of September. We didn't finish until the 13th of November. So basically a full month later than we saw in 2022. And this is more like what we would have expected in the 90s or 2000s than what we're used to now in the 2020s. And it was glorious. Like we were really happy with what we got kind of across the board. I wonder, Chelsea, can you talk a little bit about the character that brought to the 23 vintage before we get into the Counoise specifically?
Yeah, I mean, we had this beautiful extended growing season, which is the ideal. I mean, we really truly had one of the most incredible growing seasons I've had the opportunity to experience. And it's so funny because I think we all love to compare the 23 to the 22 harvest, because 22 was so early and then 23 was so late. So it feels like really, really intensely different. And they are very intensely different. But the 23 harvest started so much later. And so everything just got this chance to really accumulate sugars at a really perfect rate. Color development was exceptional. In 2023, for instance, we were pulling Saugnes for Dianthus 24 hours, sometimes less, depending on the lot that came in, which I think really speaks volumes. That's kind of our first indicator of quality for, like color and structure for some of these reds. Where 2024, we had them left on the skins for our typical, 48 hours on average. So, the 2023 vintage just felt really different from the get-go, and the get-go was late. And then it just kept going and going and going. And, Neil always says that hang time is great until it isn't. And so as long as you can leave things on the vine and they're just, slowly doing their thing and maturing as they should, and we don't have weather events on the horizon, that's what we want. So 2023 was really, 2023 was one of those harvests that just like, as a winemaker, you kind of dream about. That's the one that you always think about, like, oh, but remember 2023?
And it was a year. I remember talking with Neil, and I'm sure you were in these conversations too, but like we were at October 15th and we were less than half harvested. And like, there's no guarantee that you're going to have great weather after that. I mean, the year before we were done with harvest in the middle of October, but we got our first real rainstorm in the October 20 something. And if we had gotten that rainstorm in late October of 2023, it would have been a real problem. Right. But we didn't. We had this lovely kind of late summer weather in October and early November, and we were able to just bring things in when we wanted. It was great, as it turns out. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't like there weren't a few stressful moments when you realized how far you still had to go and how late the calendar already was.
Yeah. And it's wonderful when you have, you have tank space, because they're paced and they're more, and, everything gets its due time in the cellar. So 2023, 10 out of 10 would do again.
And it's one of the things that's worth noting is that it is equally good for reds and whites. So there are some vintages that are great for reds and good for whites and vice versa. 2023, we feel like, is a great vintage in for both colors. Okay, so let's talk about Counoise. So how do you explain Counoise to people who don't know it, Chelsea?
Oh, if it's somebody that's not familiar with Counoise, I'm delighted because this is just going to be like just the happiest introduction. Counoise is a really large berry grape variety. And for us in the cellar, when it hits the crush pad, that's definitely the one that everybody's snacking on the most because it has the most flesh to it. It's a fairly thin-skinned grape, so it doesn't have a lot of structure. But it is exceedingly juicy. So this is a great blending component for us where we are working with these Rhone varieties that do have some kind of harder edges to them. Counoise, I always say, is just kind of like this polishing element that just comes through and just cleans everything up and ties it up with a beautiful little bow. Neil would probably be laughing at me at this point because he's always the one that's kind of giving me grief for talking about all these grapes as, anthropomorphized. But the Counoise as a single varietal, I think, is just like, what a wonderful summer wine. It doesn't have the structure. It doesn't have that tannic grip. This with just a slight chill on it, especially people that are fans of Gamay or things like that. This does have that beautiful chewiness to it, but again, without that hard grip on the finish. So this is my ideal summer red. It's beautiful.
And it's funny that you mentioned, Chelsea, that it's the favorite for snacking on the sorting table, because Counoise was famously valued as a table grape before the development of seedless grapes. So if you read the old ampelographies, like the grape histories from the 19th century, that we have a couple of those old volumes in my dad's old office, it talks about Counoise as being this wonderful table grape that you can also make wine out of if you insist. Like the implication is that, like, it's not going to be very dark, it's not going to be very tannic, but it makes really good eating. And I think one of the things that I love is that, like, in the style of wines that we make, we're not just looking for things that are dark and tannic. We're looking for things that are juicy and joyful. And I feel like Counoise is very much that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I, as a part of the Esprit and the Cote and all of these other blends that we have it in, this is a really, really valuable component. And you can see sometimes we use as little as, 4%, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I think of it as being like almost like the squeeze of lemon that you might do on a dish of food. It's not necessarily, if you do it right, it's not necessarily that you taste the lemon. It's the acidity that you're bringing through doing that brings out all of the other flavors that are there. And there are, like, I can't even remember how many times we've gone through the blending trials and we're like, the Counoise, it's not as powerful as the others. Like, let's try a blend without it. And then we add a little bit of Counoise and we inevitably like it better because it has that, like, vibrancy and brightness and freshness.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great analogy because it's just that. Well, and it is the lift too, it's just.
Let's bring in some of the comments that I'm seeing here. So, like Bev's comment about the Counoise being the patio wine for red only friends that's a fun comment, because it's like, this is not necessarily a wine that you need to pair food with. It's a really kind of friendly, juicy, can be lightly chilled, would be lovely. Brian's comment on the flavors, like, it is very cherry. But I like the contrast of that with Samuel's comment, because I think in the same way that Gamay, when it's done in a Cru Beaujolais, it has all of this lovely fruit and bright acid and doesn't have a lot of tannin, but it has this little, like, lurking wildness, kind of brambly, spicy wildness that makes it more than something that's just simple and fun. I think Counoise is the same thing. So the comment on the peppery character is right on. And then Sarah's comment for a grilling wine, absolutely agree. It's great with chicken or burgers. Like, it is one of the ones that we often have when we're grilling. Chelsea, do you have something that you pair Counoise with specifically?
Oh, you know what? I mean, I honestly love pairing Counoise with book club. I think, I think this one, for me, just like great conversation and it's light and juicy enough. This is kind of, before we sit down to our meal and get to the meat of the books, this is just like our great conversation wine.
That's great. Cool. Okay. And then finally, I'll answer Richard's question about a broader question about 2023. So was 2023 exceptional for all the Paso AVAs? Yes, it really was. It was cool, but this sort of long, generous growing season across the region. I think it's one of the reasons why the Catalans from 2023 are so good. I feel like every one of those three Catalans, the white, the rosé, and the red, is the best version of that wine that we've ever made. And that's because we have a little more control in the vintages that have more challenges. We have a little more control on our own estate, but we are a little more reliant on the overall quality of the vintage for a wine like Catalan. And it was great across the entire AVA.
Yeah, the quality of fruit that we saw coming in from all the corners of Paso Robles, every single bin that came in was like, another perfect bin.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, enough with 2023. We'll have more chances to talk about it with upcoming shipments. But the next three wines that we're going to be trying were from 2022, which was a vintage that definitely offered more challenges than 2023. And the challenges that 2023 offered were vastly different, like the other side of the spectrum from what we saw in 2022. So I'm wondering, I know it's now probably feels like a long time ago. We had two harvests intervening. I'm wondering if the mental scars from the 2022 harvest have healed for you yet.
We refer to the 23 and 24 harvests as a season of healing. 2022 was it was the first time that I had heard the term heat dome. And we didn't just hear the term, we lived in the term. And it was a harvest that I learned a lot about myself. It was a harvest that I learned a lot about our teammates. And it was a harvest that really showed the benefit of who Tablas Creek is and the way we do things. We had a lot of challenges because we did have this really, really intense heat dome where everything just got really, really hot and the temperature spiked and everything just ripened immediately. So where other wineries were scrambling to try to get crews and get things off the vine and really still trying to get, their feet under them in the cellar. Our vineyard crew, who's full-time year-round, that has been there for a long, long time, they jumped and did exactly what they've been doing for some of them the last 20 years plus years. And in the cellar, we have a lot of people that have been there for a long time, and we know each other's strengths and we know how everybody works. Those poor interns from 2022, though, they were really forged in fire. They learned problem solving really early on. And it's interesting because I think, once the dust settled and we were able to pick our heads up and look around, all of us were exceedingly proud of what we accomplished in 2022, and basically just bowed down to our vineyard crew for the work that they put in. And they're the reason that the 22s are as good as they are.
I think Ian, do you have a picture of the harvest chalkboard queued up from 2022? I know we just saw the 2023 harvest chalkboard. Oh wait, actually no, it's good. Go back to that one that we just saw, the max temperatures. So this is daily high temperatures 2022 versus normal. So normal is that red line that you see, where you can see at the left-hand edge of it. So mid-August, it's typically a normal daily high temperature is in the low to mid 90s. And by the time you get to the middle of October, it's down around 80. So you can see the first half of this graph through about the 9th of September, like almost every one of those days is significantly above that average line. And then that heat dome that Chelsea was mentioning that started on the 31st of August, where we had 10 days in a row of highs over 100, and most of those over 105. Like that was incredibly impactful on what we did. And now if we go forward to the harvest chalkboard, you'll be able to see, actually it's kind of hard to see, but on the right-hand half of that, so basically this is a harvest chalkboard that normally would be top and bottom, but instead this is left and right. So the right-hand side is the bottom part of the chalkboard. And if you look the left column of the right-hand piece of chalkboard and look at how much we picked between the 5th of September and the 9th of September, which if you add that all up, we picked a third of what is normally a 2-month harvest in 5 days. And we needed to because things were getting ripe so fast that if you couldn't keep up, your windows were not a week long. Your windows were a day or two long. And if you missed it, like the chemistry got weird, things turned to raisins. And I'll talk a little bit later when we get to the Panoplie about why we feel like the regenerative organic certification that we have really helped us make something great in a vintage that offered the full range of possibilities. You could have disastrous wines from 2022. It's not like 23 or 21 where like everybody should make at least wines that are good. Like in 2022, you had the opportunity for a disaster, but you also had the opportunity to make something great. And we felt like the regenerative organic piece of what we did helped us make something great in 2 different ways. So that's a little teaser. I'll talk about that in like 20 minutes. But I
would like to interject just really quickly because our regenerative organic specialist, Erin Mason, she joined the team in 22. So she had come off the heels of another harvest, up in an area that ripens a little bit sooner than we do. And she left them and came to us. And I think it was her first week, like the Friday or Saturday of her first week. And Neil and I were talking to her and she goes, "You guys at Tablas Creek go hard." and we were like, "We'll definitely take that because yes, we do. But this isn't every year."
I remember one of Neil's comments. I think I was on a sales trip and he just sent me a text saying, "I think we've scared the interns a bit." Like
We did. We did. Yeah. Aaron stuck around. Aaron's tough as nails. I don't know that the other interns are still in wine.
Okay, let's talk about the wines though, because I do think that, I mean, those of you who have been to previous ones of these over the last couple of years have gotten to taste the rosés and the whites from 2022 and some of the early release reds. And one of the things that we were always really careful to do is in a year like 2022, like you have to pick when it's just ripe because it's ripening so fast that if you get any hint of overripeness, it just weighs the wine down. So Richard had a comment that I thought really kind of spoke to what we were going for, talking about the approachability of the 2022s. And that's because that was the only way to make something really good in 2022. You could not wait and make something really good. You could go on the early side and get something that was just ripe with this kind of higher toned, crunchier fruit, brightness to it. And that was what we decided was the right way to go in this vintage. It's not that that's the choice that we're going to make in every vintage, but in 2022, it was definitely really the only good option. But it's been fascinating to see as we have worked our way into the later release, more substantial 2022 reds, that we're going to be tasting 3 of those in the next 3 wines, that you have kind of a little bit of both. You've got kind of the darkness and power of the grape and the blend that you expect, but you still have these sort of high tone notes. So the first wine that we're going to be trying is Tannat, this 2022 Tannat. As usual, we toss the couple of rows of Cabernet that are a relic of our grapevine nursery into the Tannat during the fermentation. But I want to tell a little bit of a story of how we ended up with Tannat before I let Chelsea talk about how we make it and what we want out of it. But it is so Tannat is not a Chateauneuf du Pape variety. It's not even a Rhone variety. And we ended up with it not because we and the parents chose to bring it in. We ended up with it because the parents' nursery manager, so the guy who they had supplied with grapevines a generation earlier and who was the one with the contacts of the US Department of Agriculture who cleared the vines out of France into America, he was a lover of Tannat. And he included Tannat along with Vermentino to the 8 varieties that we and the parents had agreed on in 1989. So we were expecting 8 varieties to show up in the United States. It was the USDA station in Geneva, New York. And we got a bill from that USDA station for the virus testing of 10 grape varieties, the 8 that we had expected, plus Tannat and Vermentino. And we thought there was a mistake. I guess my dad called the station, the USDA station, up and said, "Are you sure you're not mixing us up with somebody else's grape varieties?" And their response was, "They came with the others. Like, if you've got a problem, take it up with the French." And so he called the parents, asked if the parents had by any chance sent us Tannat and Vermentino, and got this kind of incredulous response, like, "We don't grow those grapes. Why would we have sent them to you?" It took months to untangle what had happened, but he eventually traced it back to this nursery manager. And I guess I wish I had been there for this conversation. I was not. But I guess when he called him and asked him, he was totally unapologetic. He was like, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. I sent them. I know these grapes well. I've been learning about Paso Robles. You should plant them. They'll do well for you." I don't know what you say to that. But we ended up doing some research of our own and deciding that, like, at the very least, the nursery manager was right that they would grow well in Paso Robles. So we planted small blocks, like half an acre of each of them. And he was right. They do great here. We have started in little ways incorporating them, both Vermentino and Tannat, into a couple of blends. But still, most of our production of both of those grapes are bottled on their own. So if you love the Tannat, thank Didier Gilibert, who is the recently retired nursery manager of the Perrins grapevine nursery in Montpellier, France. So there you go. That's the whole story as to why we have Tannat. Chelsea, do you wanna talk about kind of what Tannat's like in the cellar, or what you enjoy about it, or what you hate about it? I don't know. However you want to take this, I'm fine.
I love Tannat. I've loved Tannat since I first started working at Tablas Creek. I'd never heard about it before. But Tannat is always just one of those, it's just like this bulletproof tank out in the vineyard. Tannat can really just weather anything. And it's one of the last things that comes into the cellar. So, towards the end of harvest, like once everything else that's definitely more finicky and you have to be like really, really on top of and watching those sugar levels as they accumulate during the harvest season. Once those are all in and taken care of, then you start like, oh yeah, let's go check out Tannat and see what Tannat's doing. And every time Tannat is just like the most perfect, like textbook example of what we want everything to come in at. And so it's always like, okay, well, yeah, pick it. That's perfect. The bricks are great. The pH is great. The TA, the total acidity is great. And then you bring it in, it ferments beautifully. Like, it's just, Tannat is what everything else, I mean, if everything else was like Tannat, this job might be maybe a little bit more boring. But we do have the ability with Tannat. We don't buy a lot of new oak at Tablas Creek. We buy a handful of new barrels every year. But we don't want to influence, a lot of our wines with oak. We really want them to speak of the place, tell a story of our vineyard and how we treat our vineyard. But Tannat is a great wine for us to really kind of neutralize these oak barrels. So we'll use them usually in Tannat for the first maybe 2-3 harvests. And then after that, they're considered neutral because Tannat can carry the oak. And in fact, when you're linking up the tannin chains that are inherent in Tannat and the tannin chains from the barrels, all of a sudden you have these beautiful long chain tannins that just feel much more complete. And so this is a beautiful example of like, you don't perceive a lot of oak on this. So it's a nice place for us to just kind of like put it away and hide it, but you do get that much more complete mouthfeel experience because of that. But Tannat is a dream. It's
It's I know we're gonna be having another pairing from Chef Jeff in a moment. But one of the things that I have always appreciated about Tannat is that like it has all of this darkness. It has black fruit. It's got some. I remember when we did the vertical tasting of Tannat, I was trying to figure out how many different ways that we could say chocolate and black cherry, because it's like every vintage was like some variation of that. It has a very well-defined personality. It has a lot of darkness, it has a lot of tannin, it has a lot of structure. And then there's always this floral top note that reminds me of violets. And it's like, it's this sort of fun little personality quirk that I always think is such a cool little like surprise, like happy surprise whenever I have Tannat, that there's that floral bit that goes along with the brawny, substantial tannic richness.
I mean, Tannat's a wine that really has it all going on. I always say, Tannat is, if you take, the flavor and aroma wheel, that all the wine writers have, and you basically just spin it like a wheel of fortune wheel, and that's Tannat. So like, it's just got a little bit of everything. And every time you come back to smell this glass or to taste this glass, you're going to be able to pull something else out. And I think that's so fun if you have a group of people with all these varied experiences, these different life paths, and they're all going to pull something completely different out of Tannat, which is how neat.
Just get ready for them to pull a bunch of different things and black cherry and chocolate, because that'll be in all their descriptions. And
yeah, and violets.
So yeah, cool. Let's run through some of the comments. We're getting cool comments from people about it. I do think that there's that kind of tobacco, like that sweet tobacco note that reminds me. I get that more out of Bordeaux varieties than I generally get out of Rhone varieties. And Tannat is actually from the Basque country, kind of south of Bordeaux, and it is more closely related to grapes like Cabernet than it is to anything from the Rhone. So I think that's perceptive. So that's a good comment. What else? Yeah, I think my dad became a convert to Tannat for sure. That's fun. Yeah, what else? There's a comment from Richard. I mean, Tannat and Vermentino, like these are grapes that we introduced into America. They were things that we were bottling on their own in an era when we weren't doing much varietal bottling at all, where most of the things were going into blends. So in some cases, like they were the first Tablas varietals that people got a chance to try, because they were the first things that we were bottling as varietals before we were doing Grenache and Mourvedre and things like that as varietal wines.
Just to make sure that everybody's really confused, like you're a Rhone house, the first varietal bottlings that you release are actually not Rhones. Stay with us.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why we don't actually do more of these. It's one of the reasons why we generally don't make enough of these to put into distribution, is that we don't want to confuse people in the broader market. So like if we're selling things to a restaurant, if you think of the number of people that the wine needs to go through before it gets to that restaurant, it has to go from us to our national marketing agent. It goes from them to the distributor. The distributor then has to tell their salespeople about it. The salespeople have to tell the buyers at the restaurants about it. And then they have to tell their staff. And eventually it has to tell the customer. So it's like this game of telephone that has to go through like 6 people. And it's a hard thing. Like you work for years to try to remind people, oh, like this is what Tablas Creek does. And then they get something like this that's out of left field. It's why we reserve it for our wine club and for our direct sales, for people who we have direct contact with, and we can tell that story. So Jeff just brought me the next dish. Again, I'm going to try very hard not to dump it onto my keyboard. So this is the Yukon Gold Shiitake Gratin with vegetables. So Jeff, I don't know if you can hear me, but if you are there and ready to talk about what you made, please do.
Hey, how is everybody? I hope everybody's hanging in with us. I just took this off the stove, and this dish, first of all, earthiness and richness, obviously fantastic pairing with red wines. This is kind of a response to everybody saying to me, what about vegetarian red wine pairings? And I get more and more of that all the time. And I think that a lot of people feel like there are very few vegetable pairings that go well with red wine, and specifically in spring. And so when we have the fresh Yukon Gold potatoes in a gratin form with shiitakes, the shiitakes really, really flavor the potatoes so well. And so you're getting this super, super rich kind of earthy flavor from the layers of potato and shiitake. And then what we did is we braised some root vegetables and just carrot, leek, and rutabaga. And I think that rutabaga is a bit unlikely. A lot of people don't use it. I think it has a really unique and fun flavor, and it really, really pairs well with truffle, which you wouldn't think at all. The dish incorporates all French technique, which is really, really a fun way to cook. Doing a classic Palmes Dauphinois or a gratin, adding the shiitake to it, and then blanching your vegetables and lightly braising them in a vegetable stock, finishing them with truffle butter. And then because it is French technique, you then finish it with truffle butter again to make sure that it has enough butter in it. A really light but very, very earthy type of dish. And again, in food and wine pairing, we're looking for this dish to just be a foil for the beautiful, bright fruit of the wine to shine. And so this is kind of a base for any of these red wines to really show off of, to bring kind of fruit out of the wine and refresh your palate with the wine, looking to have another bite of this kind of spring, a little bit of, I would say, shoulder season, a little bit of spring, a little bit of late winter gratin. And I hope that you guys are enjoying the flavors on it.
This reminds me of the fact that, I mean, mushrooms, if you look at their DNA, they're kind of halfway between plants and animals. So I think the idea that mushrooms are kind of that bridge to things that are often thought of as red wine pairings makes a lot of sense when you look genetically. Is that like, do you tend to feel like mushrooms in general are good red wine foils, Jeff?
I do all the time. I mean, I think that mushroom is just like you said, a bridge to so many different proteins, acting as its own protein very often, but all over. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, it's almost religion to have salmon, mushrooms, and Pinot Noir. If you think about it like that, we think about it in Burgundy as well. I was in Bordeaux, and we have all different kinds of beautiful mushrooms going on. Often in 5 or 6 course dinners that I do a lot here in Paso Robles, we'll look to some of the lighter wines like you guys were talking about, like a Counoise or a Grenache that's a little bit lighter. On that maybe 3rd course in a multi-course pairing, I like to show a mushroom dish. It really is great, and it bridges us into maybe a heavier meat dish. So I think the mushrooms have become really important in the food and wine pairing world. Yeah.
And talk about the importance of the rutabaga in this, because I agree. When we were looking at the menu ahead of time, like, that was one of the things that we kind of called out as being really interesting and maybe a little surprising. What do you feel like it adds?
Well, it is interesting. Well, first of all, the thing that it adds most is that nobody ever uses it. So it's
really cheap. Like, how is this good? Like, nobody.
Yeah, rutabaga has this I would say earthy but almost piquant flavor to it, almost like a lily in a way. If you have a radicchio or a bitter lettuce, there's a little bit of that character in a rutabaga on its own. But if you braise it a little bit, roast it for a little while, you're going to start to bring out the natural sweetness in it. And I think that it adds kind of almost like people raise their eyebrow at it, like, what is that flavor? I can't quite put my finger on it. That's why it's important to me for people to wake up to it and say, wow, I think I'm going to use that as well. Of course, leeks being fantastic. I think I cook with leeks more than just about anything else. Of course, really nice spring carrots are a slam dunk with this. But like you said, the rutabaga brings in an unlikely character to it. It's very easy to cook. It looks like a celery root, basically, or it looks like a turnip more than anything else. It looks like a yellow turnip, I would say, but tastes completely different than a turnip. And I think we should use more of it. So the reason I used it is because it was just something off the cuff a little bit.
It reminds me a little bit of, like, the flavor reminds me of parsnip a little bit, where it has some of that same kind of sweetness and texture that kind of caramelizes well.
I think that's a really, really good call. Yeah, parsnip being a little bit more floral, or rutabaga has a hint of more bitter to it, but in the same style, in the same family. Were we to add parsnip to this dish, we'd find that kind of parsnip flavor would overwhelm a little bit of the other flavors a little bit, because parsnip has a certain character to it. And so the reason for the rutabaga is just to be unique, I guess.
Well, it was delicious. I actually like picked a couple of the rutabaga pieces out first because I was like, okay, I got to try the rutabaga before I try everything else. And it was delicious.
Well, once again, when you braise things in truffle butter, you're going to be all right, no matter what you put into it.
When in doubt.
But I really hope that people will try this recipe and use it not only as like a side. You would think, oh, it would be a side dish, but like I said, it's a great bridge course between a white wine course and use it for a lighter red wine, and then get into a meat course. And I think it's got a lot of viability like that. So I love it. I hope everybody else loves it too.
And am I right that these are the dishes that you're going to be making for the live pickup party in like 9 days?
Yes. Yeah. Which is, can you believe it's almost here, the live pickup party?
No, I can't. I cannot believe that we're already at the end of March. I can't believe we already have Bud Break. I can't believe that it is 2025. Like, there's a whole bunch of things I can't believe. But
it seems like January takes a long time to be over, and then all of a sudden, here we go. Yes. And while I was preparing this today, my staff were working on some other things, and they looked at me with raised eyebrows and said, because there's 400 some odd people coming into this. They said, we're going to make shiitake gratin for 400 and scallops for 400. And I said, yes, you're going to start on Wednesday, so get going.
It's a lot of slicing.
So, sometimes we come up with these ideas, and I'm so excited about the idea. I know that we can pull it off for many, many people. And I think that's really a valid point, in that I do gratins quite often. We just did the Rhone Ragers event, and I did a classic pommes dauphinoise, and it is great to do for large amounts of people because that has flavor packed into a small little presentation, and you can always count on it. So I'm looking forward to doing it. I'm looking forward to the challenge of making every bite just as good as the bite you had tonight.
Amazing. Have no doubts.
Oh, by the way, one more thing. Yes, my first event at Tablas Creek was in 2004. And I don't know what happened. I've been cooking, and then I put my head up, and it's 2025. But it was a cheese event that we did here, and it kicked off my career in Paso Robles. I'm forever thankful to everybody here at Tablas Creek for introducing me to the area, and we just kept on cooking.
Seriously, you literally kept on cooking. We are so grateful that we played a small role in bringing you up here to be a part of the community. So thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Take care, guys.
Hi, Jeff.
Okay, so let's dive into wine number 5. Actually, let's wrap up the last couple of comments that we got in about Tannat and food pairings. Like Anne's comment about Tannat being delicious with a Black Angus steak. Like, yes, absolutely, 100%. Tannat loves like substantial proteins because it's got both tannins and acids, so it's actually refreshing. When you have kind of a big rich steak or something like a bolognese, 100%. Richard's comment about the pickup party being remembered for the rutabaga content. Yes, that will be something that will live on in future years. And then I wonder if you could pull up Bev's comment. And Chelsea, do you want to talk about what your favorite dish is with Tannat?
So one of my favorite dishes that we've turned into like an annual occurrence is the Thomas Keller slow cooker cassoulet. And it is a beautiful pairing with the Tannat, especially with, the spicier sausage, and, we use duck, and, the duck with the high fat content is it's gorgeous with that powerful structure of Tannat. And the acidity just slices through, the rich butteriness of the beans. So that would probably be my go-to. Do you have any favorites?
I don't, other than I think of it when I have a steak. Like that's my go-to. But I made cassoulet, like real cassoulet, for the first time over the winter, and now next time I do it, I'm going to try it with Tannat.
Highly recommended.
Cool. Love it. Okay, let's dive into the Le Complice. So This is so we have 3 kind of wine club only high-end blends that we do. We have the Blé that came out with the fall wine club shipment. We have the Le Complice and we have the Panoplie. So you're getting the other two high-end blends, and each is based on its own grape. So the Blé is based on Grenache. The Panoplie, as we'll get to, is based on Mourvedre, and the Le Complice leads with Syrah. But it is really the idea behind it came from this observation that we made in the first couple of years that we had Terre Noir in production, which started in like 2013, where we commented that it had some of the same herby, kind of spicy lift that we got from Syrah that was fermented with a portion of whole clusters or with stems, at some of that same kind of green herb character. And so it was my dad who had the idea, it was one of the last kind of wines that he helped put together when he was already in his 90s. But he had the idea of putting Syrah and Terre together and taking advantage of the fact that Terre came with that same herby grip, but had high acid. And Syrah, if there is a weakness in Syrah in our climate, it's that it tends to be low acid. And we found that when we put Terre and Syrah together, we got something that like neither one of them did on their own. You had like Syrah's black fruit and darkness, and yet you had this translucency to it. And my analogy, and I can't remember if I've said this at a previous pickup party, but my analogy is that adding Terre to Syrah is like when the sun comes out and shines through a stained glass window. You go from like, you know that there's color there, you know that there's this like deep depth of content, and then all of a sudden the sun shines through it, and all of this is illuminated and kind of bursts into vibrancy. And I feel like that is what Terre Noir does to Syrah. So I think this is a picture of Terre in the vineyard. One of the things you can see maybe from that cluster on the left is that the noir in Terre is more aspirational than it is descriptive. Do you want to tell the story of the first time that we fermented Terre, Chelsea?
Well, the first time we fermented Terre Noir, I think we pulled something like a 30% Saunier, just hoping to get some color out of it, just concentrating the living daylights out of this wine. And then learning later that it's a really, really powerfully structured wine. So pulling a 30% Saunier maybe wasn't the best choice. It's all a learning process, but, pulling juice out really didn't change anything. And so we were having these, thinking we're very funny and very clever, our Terre Gris that we got sent. But Terre Noir, I mean, it does have a noir at its heart, on that finish. I always tell people, you smell Terre Noir and it has a color almost like an aged rosé. It does have kind of like that tawnier garnet color. And then you stick your nose in the glass and it has this like dusty rose petal. It feels like it is going to be just this kind of ethereal experience on the palate. And then you take that sip and it has these claws that just hold on. And the finish just goes on forever and ever. Terre Noir it took a while for us to really wrap our head around this grape variety because it is really quite different than a lot of other grapes that we have at our disposal in the vineyard. But using it as a blending component, you do maintain that finish of Syrah. You're not losing anything from that grip on the back. But for me, it's always just been kind of like unknitting Syrah, because Syrah tends to be a little bit opaque, especially in its youth. It can sometimes be a little bit difficult to see into the true heart of Syrah. And so Terre Noir just helps to open that up a little bit, without losing any of that power, things that people really, really love about Syrah.
And if you're wondering, Ian, if you can bring back up the blend, you'll notice that yes, we're talking about Syrah and Terre, but there are 2 other grapes in there as well. There is 3% Muscardin, and Muscardin is very similar to Terre as far as we can tell in terms of what it tastes like and what it looks like. So we didn't feel like it was quite like rich and substantive. Not rich isn't the right word, but we didn't feel like it had quite a well-defined enough character to have the 2022 vintage be the debut of a 100% Muscardin bottling. That will come in 2023. We are bottling the 2023 Muscardin next week. So the first ever Muscardin outside of France. Maybe the first ever Muscardin even inside France. We don't know. Probably nobody bottles Muscardin on its own. But we thought that because it is sort of like terry and pale, floral, good grip, like that it would fit neatly into the Le Complice, and it did. And then that Grenache component. And I remember when we were blending that first year of Le Complice, which was 2016, like we tried this blend with varying amounts of Syrah and Terre, and like it changed the character, but all of them felt like they were more kind of intellectually interesting than they were really satisfying. And we eventually decided, okay, fine, we need to put some Grenache in here to give it some lushness on the mid palate, because otherwise it was all like front and back palate and fascinating, but kind of hard. There was a hardness to it without Grenache that when we added Grenache, it just sort of richened it out enough and softened it enough to be something that was really interesting and also delicious.
But it's so great to have all of these tools at our disposal, all of these different varieties that we have, and they all have these very specific and unique characteristics and personalities. And I do feel like Grenache in most blending situations is kind of our fixer. Grenache is just this great variety that it's got that chewiness, it's got that inherent sweetness. When it's fermented completely dry, it does have that beautiful berry sweetness. You add a little Grenache and all of a sudden, the world is just set right.
Amazing. Okay, cool. If anyone has any comments about the Le Complice or questions about it, toss it into the chat. But I think we should.
I actually would like to talk about Le Complice a little bit more if we could.
Please.
Le Complice is, we have so much heritage that we need to respect at Tablas Creek, that there are like certain parameters that we do need to stay within to make sure that we are really making sure that we're honoring the legacy that's been built, before us. With Le Complice, that's our wine. It's our own weirdo. Like we get to do whatever we want. And I do think this is like one of the coolest wines, as far as like more contemporary winemaking goes. This is definitely a little bit more on trend than the other things that we do. So a lot of the Syrah lots that we choose for Le Complice are whole cluster or stem inclusion, where stem inclusion means that we destem the grapes and then add a specific amount of stems back in. So we can really fine tune how much stem inclusion we want to have there. Whole cluster means it's just fermented whole, like as the whole cluster. And so that's, a lot of those Lucille Ball foot stomp lots that we actually really do in real life. And then we do age it in concrete. So we have all of these like very unique processes for Le Complice, like aside from the fact that it has all these insane varieties that nobody else is doing together. It also has a very unique just fingerprint here at Tablas Creek in our cellar.
Lovely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, we don't get to make up new wines very often, which is why
we're drinking Le Complice, and we already talked about Panoplie Blanc.
Yeah, I mean, we get like one new wine every like 5 years is kind of the things we get to explore, because we are real believers in working through the challenges of making something and respecting that tradition and trying to make it just 3% better every year, and the belief that like over time that makes a huge difference. And so we don't very often just be like, okay, let's come up with something new. So when we do, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think a big part of it too, though. I mean, there is the heritage and the legacy that we're respecting, but there's also a certain element of making sure that we make wines that we enjoy. As a team. I mean, we're talking about Le Complice, we're talking about Panoplie Blanc. Alouette is a newcomer on the scene. All of these are just things that we as Tablas Creek employees feel very strongly about. Like, this is what I want to drink. Hopefully everybody else does too.
And these are things that usually these ideas present themselves around the blending table. Almost always, it is because of what we are tasting in the wines that, like, we come up with this idea as we have these components sitting in front of us, because like these components are talking to us in a way that we think is worth listening to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, now let's talk about Panoplie. So it is our pick of the very best, like 2 or 3% of the lots that come into the cellar. It is always based on Mourvedre. This is a grape that Beaucastel really made the reputation for in Chateauneuf du Pape, and it's what makes them unique from other Chateauneuf du Papes. This wine is modeled after the Hommage à Jacques Perrin, which is the wine that the Perrins make in honor of the patriarch Jacques, who was the one who in the 1950s converted the estate to organic. He was the one who went out and found all of the trace varieties that had been lost in Chateauneuf du Pape during phylloxera and brought them back, planted them in the vineyards, and the one who established Mourvedre as kind of the primary grape at Beaucastel. So we have, if there are wines like the Le Complice that we come up with the idea for on the fly, like this is the exact opposite of that. This is a wine that basically was presented to us by our tradition, by who we are and who our founders are. It's been really wonderful to be able to put something together like this in this long tradition and then taste it and see the way that it belongs. So I think people usually ask, like, what does Panoplie refer to? Chelsea, do you want to do your best to talk about where the name comes from?
Well, I was so delighted because when I first started working at Tablas Creek, I was a student at Cal Poly and I was taking a poetry class. And one of the poems that we were reading used the word panoply, and the teacher or professor had a gotcha moment where he wanted to, make sure people were really reading and absorbing what was happening. So he asked, what does panoply mean? And I was definitely that super annoying student that was so excited because I'd been working at Tablas Creek and I knew what panoply meant. But panoply is essentially, it's the same in English as in French, and panoply is a full, complete suit of armor. Oh, well, that is.
Ian has been waiting for this moment like all night.
Is that Ian? But it is, it has power and it has shine and it has, there's a lot of complexity in this wine. And it's such a treat to blend Panoplie because essentially, I mean, it is truly barrel select where, all of these top lots that we find during tasting that everybody is and usually people will taste a wine and say, this is Panoplie to me. There are certain wines that you taste around that blending table that just scream Panoplie. And even within that, we might, if we have one of those lots that's 8 barrels, in its entirety, we might just pull one of those barrels, or we might even just pull a few gallons from that one barrel. So this is truly just the most special of the wines that we have at Tablas. And I think it's important to note too that it's not necessarily, I still think it fits within the Tablas Creek array where it's not so big and it's not so extracted and it's not just so intensely powerful that it just kind of doesn't quite fit. It does have the power, it does have the structure, but it also has elegance and it has opulence. I mean, this is a wine that we do want that full suit of armor. We want a really, truly complete picture here.
And I think that's a really important point because it's not like we just pick the most powerful lots to go into Panoplie. We pick the most expressive lots. And that's an important distinction because we're looking for more than power. We're looking for elegance. We're looking for minerality. We're looking for balance. We're looking for freshness. So it is really one of those, like, you know it when you see it kind of things. When you go through the tasting, there are these lots that are great, and there are these lots that are great and feel like they have something extra. And those are the ones that we flag for the Panoplie. Question from Richard on how much of the Panoplie is from the En Gobelet, from the head trained dry farmed plantings. Do you want to take that one?
I do. So I was going to say the same thing. Oh, let's pull up Richard's question here. So this has become a challenge for us during blending, because En Gobelet needs to be 100% head trained dry farmed fruit. But as these blocks have gained maturity, they have become better and better and better. And so in every single one of these blending sessions that we do, these, Scruffy Hill blocks and the Jewel Ridge, newer planting, these are all getting ones with a star, which means those are Panoplie lots. So we do try to be really careful as far as we need to make sure that the best of the best goes into Panoplie, and then we also have enough to make sure that we are able to make an excellent En Gobelet. So I would, En Gobelet is a great runner-up for Panoplie, essentially, when you look at it that way. But just, again, making sure that we are balancing these things. And, as far as the head trained lots, we are getting more and more of our vineyard planted to that style. So we are having more of these, the gallonage available to us. So to answer your question, there is a decent amount of Scruffy Hill and, all of the head trained things. And I think in coming vintages, it is going to start shifting even heavier. But again, that's because we love the wines that these plantings yield. And so that's the direction that our vineyard is heading.
I mean, we're at the point now where we've got almost as many head trained dry farmed vineyard acres as we do trellised, closer spaced vineyard acres. Not all of that wide space dry farm stuff is in production yet, but more and more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is really exciting, because I feel like, obviously Esprit is our flagship wine. But I do think En Gobelet for me speaks so powerfully of our property, and not just who Tablas Creek is, but the direction that we're going. And it's all about, responsible farming and being judicious with the resources that you have, which I think tells a really, really excellent story. And it's all in a beautiful wine, which is, what Tablas Creek is all about.
So cool. Okay, I teased this it feels like an age ago that I would talk about why I felt like the regenerative organic protocols helped us make great wine, particularly in a year like 2022. And I want to get back to that. I feel like there were two big heat spikes in 2022 that we had to navigate. It was also a drought year, third year of drought. Was the point at which something like 97% of California was in extreme drought or worse. So it was a high stress environment. But we got the rain that we got early in that winter of 21, 22. If you looked at the turn of the calendar year, in December of 2021, we were actually ahead of our schedule for rainfall. And then we had an almost entirely dry January and February. And so by the time it got wet again in March, we were so far behind in rainfall that we were never going to catch up. In March, we got 3 or 4 inches, and that was it. So one of the ways in which the regenerative organic certification really helps in a year like that is that a lot of the vineyard practices are designed to increase the carbon content of your soil. And they do this for lots of reasons. It's a way of helping your soil be a carbon sink. So you pull carbon out of the atmosphere where it causes climate change and lots of other problems, and you put it in the soil. But it has these benefits in the soil that higher carbon content, higher organic matter soil helps you hold more water. There's this cool stat shared by the Regenerative Organic Alliance that increasing your topsoil organic matter content by 1% helps each acre of your topsoil hold 20,000 more gallons of water, which is just an incredible statistic. So One of the things that those regenerative organic protocols allowed us to do was get through the first like 2/3 of the growing season without the vines showing the stress that I would see pretty routinely as I was driving around Paso. I was seeing things already with leaves turning yellow or red, looking dried out or overstressed. And our vineyard, until we got to that kind of mid-August point, still looked great. Do we have a picture of like the soil side of things, Ian? I think I saw one in the draft that you sent around. So this is a great example. This is a block. I think this is actually from not last winter, but the winter before, but not that original winter. But it gives you a sense of what we try to do with our soil, which is essentially get this rich canopy of life growing on top of the soil and these deep roots. Those roots have the advantage that they are holding the soil in place, so you don't have to worry about erosion. But also, that's all carbon content. That's all organic matter that the plants at the surface are growing and then injecting down into the soil. And if you till that and turn it over, it decomposes and gets re-released into the atmosphere. But if you find other ways to manage your cover crop or your kind of living layer on the soil without uprooting it, that just accumulates more and more year after year. So one of the central tenets of regenerative farming is moving away from annual tillage and instead leaving those soil layers undisturbed so they can continue to accumulate that carbon, and all of that richer, more organic matter rich soil will hold more water. So that was the first way that I felt like in 2022, our regenerative organic protocols helped. The second, Chelsea has already alluded to, and that happened during harvest. One of the pieces of the ROC certification that is different from any of the other certifications that we have been a part of or that we know about is the farm worker fairness piece. And that requires that we pay our farm workers a living wage. It requires that their working conditions be safe and be good. And it also requires that we set up this training. And this is a picture from that initial training that we did with the crew in 2020 or 2019, maybe, where you try to break down the hierarchy that is found in so many agricultural organizations and essentially give a voice to the guys whose boots are on the ground and whose hands are on the vines every day. And it turned out that in that period of incredible stress during that 10-day heat dome, and everyone was scrambling for labor, crew wanted to come and work at Tablas Creek. And we were able to keep up with the stresses of the 2022 harvest, in part because we had established the relationship and the trust with the team who needed to be out there picking. And we did this in lots of different ways, not just paying them well, not just paying them for year-round work, but also in that we would stop picking at 10:30 or 11 when it got above 90 degrees. Like, we weren't picking into the afternoon. We were doing night picks. We were trying to do things in a way that were better for the grapes, but also better for the people who were out there doing this work. So I think it's a really important thing about regenerative organic that, yes, it's about the soil, but it's not just about the soil. It's about the business that goes into the farming as well as its results.
Yeah, being part of this winery as it went through the ROC, the regenerative organic certification process was incredibly inspirational. And it's so cool because you see the effects of, getting and attaining and maintaining that certification. And people feel like they have a voice. So now all of a sudden, instead of just having David, our vineyard manager who's been here forever, now he also has more eyes on the ground because people have greater ownership of this property. And the more people you have with ideas and, things to say, and a set of eyes that are, really looking at things in a different way, that's incredibly valuable. So it's an investment that comes back in spades.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I like Brian's comment here. And I think that that's 100% right. I mean, yes, you're working with nature. You're trying to create biodiversity. You're trying to create microbial activity, fungal activity, organic matter. But it does have benefits outside of that. So it's something that we are really proud to have helped play a role in bringing to California and bringing to the world of wine. Okay, I think we have worked our way through all 6 of these wines, which is pretty great. There are a few things that I wanted to highlight that we are working on, or we are going to be working on in the coming weeks. So one of the really important things that I've been emphasizing to people is that we are busier this year in terms of trying to bring Tablas Creek out to the broader world than we have been at any point in the 23 years that I've been out here. It's not just that we are busier than any point since COVID. I think we have 20 something events that we have in the second quarter of this year that we're hosting around California and around the country. We're also continuing to do our educational events here. I know, Chelsea, you and I are going to be hosting the annual blending seminar coming up on April 27th. So anybody who wants to hear more from us, come. Should be really, really fun. For those of you who have not done this, it's when we pull samples of all of the key varietals and sit you around tables, walk you through our blending process, and then set you loose with graduated cylinders to make your own blends, which is always really fun. We'll also be doing a summer vertical tasting the way that we have always done. That's a reminder, Chelsea, we need to figure out what wine we're going to do this with. But that's going to be July. We also are out on the road a ton. We've been all over the place already this year. This is there's Neil. Again, Neil has been in the UK, so we have been as far as like London and Dusseldorf, but we've also been Florida, San Diego, Fresno, Texas. We're going to be heading back to Texas. We're going to be heading on a swing. Darren, our national sales manager, is going to be taking a swing through the Southeast to places that we don't get to very often, like Tennessee and North and South Carolina. I'm going to be heading to DC and Virginia and Maryland. Looks like I'll be in New York. It's not on this calendar yet, so keep your eyes on your emails or your or the social media accounts. So we've been trying to share where we've been going in lots of different ways, not just by email, but also on social media. So we have this Tablas on Tour series that Ian's been putting together. So we are trying to make sure that we don't just rely on you to come to us, that instead we make the effort to come to you. So keep your eyes on where we're going to be coming. Hopefully we'll be close to you no matter where you are. If you have questions, if you're in a place and you have opportunities, like you have a restaurant that you have a good relationship with, or you have a country or city club you're a part of that hosts wine events, and you'd like us to consider being a part of one of those events, just reach out to me or reach out to Ian and let us know, and we'll do what we can to incorporate it. We are also continuing our virtual and on-demand events. Probably the longest lasting of these series has been the conversation series, where I have gotten to interview some of the really most fascinating people in the world of wine. So far this year, a few of the people who I've gotten to talk to have been like Kevin Zraly, the legendary somm and author who really created wine education in America. We have Louis Barriol, who's the 18th generation proprietor of Chateau Saint-Côme in Gigondas. And then Pilar Brito, who's up in the upper right-hand corner, who is just burst onto the scene of wine. She's a wine educator and influencer who is, I think, doing some of the most compelling educational content online right now. So trying to talk to people, all different facets of the world of wine. Keep your eyes on Instagram for that. I feel like I missed some stuff. I don't know, Chelsea, what are you looking forward to in your world over the next few weeks and months?
Well, I will say, so next week, we are going to be bottling some of our estate reds from the 23 harvest. So, we kind of touched lightly on Muscardin, and we will be doing our first ever single varietal Muscardin. We've got a whopping maybe 20 cases. 160 gallon barrel. Yeah. Coming out the gates hot. And we also have some really beautiful blends. So like the Engoblé, which we touched on earlier. Also, we have some really cool, fun new Lignée de Tablas wines that we're going to be releasing that I think all of us in the cellar are very excited about. And I'm from the Sierra Foothills, and both of these wines are from the Sierra Foothills. So this is just like a really cool connecting point for me personally. And then, of course, coming up in May, we have some of the Perrins coming out to do red blending for the 2024 vintage, which, again, just make sure, take deep breaths and everything's going to be fine. But it's always such a treat to have them out here. I feel like when they leave, all of us are just kind of like wilted flowers, like, oh, I wish they were here longer. So that's just wonderful. But, aside from that, just being at Tablas Creek, I've been here for a long time, and I'm not part of the family, but it truly feels like I'm part of the family. And it's one of those places where you're constantly pushing and constantly trying new things. And it does feel like this really beautiful, lush think tank. We're out in nature and trying things that are cool and new and trying to be better in every facet. And so that's just an exciting thing to be a part of, I think. So yeah, just everything.
Awesome. And I realized I was a little bit, I have some, I don't know if it's quite breaking news, but I have some relevant news. We just signed the agreement, and we will be doing another Rhone River cruise, spring of 2026. So anybody who is looking for something cool to do, we're going to be going up the Rhone from Avignon up to Lyon. We'll have a visit to the beautiful new cellar at Beaucastel. It's going to be May 3rd through 10th of 2026. And we hope to have the official announcement and the chance to sign up posted
hopefully
in the next couple of weeks.
Amazing. That's great news.
Yeah. I don't think I've even told you that yet. So
no, this is
you heard it here first. Cool. Well, any final words, Chelsea, beyond the kind of beautiful closing that you just gave?
I just, I would like to thank you, Jason, for the opportunity here at Tablas Creek. I always tell people one of the cool things about working here that I've really never been told no. If you have an idea or if you have something you want to try, this is just such a trusting space full of people. They just want to be better in every way. And then also to everybody that's here tonight, it's such a delight. Getting to connect with all of you online is so cool because it's so much more broad. But, if we do have the opportunity to connect with you in person, I actually had the opportunity to go do a wine dinner down in San Diego last week. And it just fills us up, especially those of us in the cellar, because to actually talk to people that are passionate about our wines, and, you work so hard and you put a lot of yourselves into this process. And then to hear that people are so excited about these and they're, opening them at, these special occasions and anniversary dinners and just, marking their celebrations with them. It's just, it's such a treat. So thank you.
Yeah. Lovely. I don't really have I can't top that really. So I'll just say thank you again to everybody who tuned in tonight. Thank you on behalf of the parents, the rest of my family, Ian behind the controls, Chelsea, thank you for joining me tonight. And thank you to all of you for attending. We are honored to have you as a part of the Tablas Creek family. And let's do this again in 6 months.
sunset gray